The Grand Hotel lobby was glowing with its golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the quiet whisper of expensive perfumes drifting through the air. Guests walked in with their heads high, dressed in branded clothes, as though stepping into this building made them royalty. Behind the reception counter stood the hotel manager, a man with slicked-back hair, a fake smile glued to his face, and arrogance dripping from every word he spoke. He believed he could judge people's worth by their clothes, by their accents, by the color of their skin. And that day, when the revolving glass door opened and a tired, black woman stepped inside with a small, old-fashioned suitcase in her hand, his judgmental eyes sharpened. She looked exhausted, her clothes simple but neat, her eyes carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights. The other staff glanced at her, and some guests whispered. To them, she did not belong in a hotel like this, at least, that's what their narrow minds thought. The woman walked slowly to the counter, her hands trembling slightly as if she wasn't used to such places. "I have a booking," she said softly, her voice calm yet carrying an undertone of firmness. The manager's lips curved into a mocking smirk. Without even checking properly, he gave a sarcastic chuckle and leaned closer, lowering his voice but making sure nearby guests could still hear. "If you pay for the worst room, you get the suite," he mocked, rolling his eyes, clearly intending to humiliate her. A few people around laughed quietly, while others simply watched, curious about what would unfold. The woman didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't defend herself with anger. Instead, she met his eyes with a calmness that unsettled him for a moment. "That's fine," she replied, her tone quiet but powerful, almost as though she knew something he didn't. The manager raised his brow, tapping on the keyboard lazily, pretending to check her booking, while inside he was already dismissing her as someone unimportant. To him, she was just another face that would leave and never matter. What he didn't know was that this woman was about to change his life, the hotel's reputation, and the lives of everyone who was mocking her at that moment. For behind her quiet eyes and weary smile hid a truth so powerful, it could shatter the fake crowns of arrogance that people like him wore. She picked up her room key without a single complaint, thanked him politely, and walked toward the elevator as if she carried no burden at all. But in reality, every step she took was shaking the ground beneath those who had judged her too quickly. The elevator doors slid shut, trapping the golden glow of the lobby behind her. Inside the lift, the woman closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. It wasn't the first time she had been mocked, judged, or belittled because of the color of her skin or the simplicity of her clothes. Life had taught her patience, had forced her to bury her pain deep beneath layers of quiet dignity. But today was different. She adjusted the strap of her worn handbag and opened her eyes, looking at her reflection in the mirrored wall of the elevator. For a brief second, the reflection staring back didn't look tired at all. It looked sharp, determined, and full of secrets. When the elevator dinged and the doors opened, she walked out gracefully, her heels clicking against the corridor floor. Her worst room was at the farthest end of the hallway, small compared to the grand suites she passed along the way. The manager had deliberately chosen that for her, she knew. He wanted to make sure she knew her place, but she didn't mind. She slid the key card, opened the door, and stepped inside. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the single bed, a desk, and a window with a view of the dumpsters outside. Any ordinary guest would have complained, demanded an upgrade, or at least asked for a refund. She didn't. She set her suitcase on the bed, sat down slowly, and let out a sigh. From her bag, she pulled out a small leather notebook. Its cover was old, scratched from years of use, but inside it contained plans, notes, and signatures that could change the fate of not just this hotel, but the city itself. She flipped through the pages, stopping at one in particular, a printed contract, carefully folded, carrying the name of the hotel at the top. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. The manager downstairs thought she was nothing but a poor wanderer. Little did he know that in less than 24 hours, the ownership of this very hotel would fall into her hands. Meanwhile, downstairs, the manager was still laughing with another employee about her. "Did you see the look on her face?" he sneered. "These people walk in thinking they belong here. It's almost funny. If she lasts the night without complaining about the room, I'll be shocked." His assistant chuckled nervously, not daring to disagree. The guests who had overheard the earlier remark carried the story around like gossip, whispering about the strange woman in the old clothes. Everyone thought the same thing, that she was too ordinary for such a luxurious place. But arrogance is blind and pride deafens ears. None of them knew who she really was. None of them had the faintest idea that she was far more powerful than they could ever imagine. As the night deepened, the hotel corridors grew quiet. The woman remained awake in her small room, sitting by the window under the dim light of the lamp. She had taken out her phone, scrolling through emails filled with attachments, approvals, and legal documents. Tomorrow morning at precisely 10 a.m., she had a meeting with the hotel's board of directors, and at that meeting, the true storm would break. But as calm as she appeared, there was a shadow in her heart, a sadness buried deep within her eyes. This wasn't just about business. This wasn't just about revenge. This was personal. Because years ago, long before she was a powerful figure, long before her name was known in elite business circles, she had once stood in a hotel lobby very much like this one. She had been younger then, desperate for a job, begging for a chance to prove herself. And she had been thrown out by a manager who told her, "People like you don't belong here." That memory had never left her. It burned inside her like a scar, pushing her to rise higher, to climb beyond the reach of those who mocked her. And now, fate had brought her back to the same kind of place, facing the same kind of arrogance. Only this time, she wasn't the powerless girl being thrown out. She was the woman holding the strings. She closed her notebook gently, placed it on the desk, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow they will know." Morning sunlight spilled across the city, painting the tall glass windows of the hotel in golden light. Guests filled the breakfast lounge with laughter and chatter, dressed in sharp suits and designer dresses. Waiters hurried between tables, pouring coffee and serving fresh croissants. It was a picture of luxury and comfort, but beneath that glossy surface, something much bigger was brewing. The black woman walked into the dining area quietly, her presence drawing subtle stares yet again. Some people nudged each other, whispering about the same strange guest who had booked the worst room. She ignored them, carrying herself with quiet grace as she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat near the corner window. Her eyes scanned the room, not with envy or nervousness, but with a sharp calculation, as though she was measuring every detail, every person, every reaction. The manager spotted her from across the lounge. His smirk returned instantly. He walked over with an exaggerated politeness, the kind that was laced with hidden cruelty. "How was the room?" he asked loudly, making sure nearby guests could hear. "I hope our budget accommodation met your expectations." A ripple of quiet. Laughter echoed among some of the listeners. The woman raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. Her calmness made his smile falter for the briefest second. "It was perfect," she said simply, her tone firm and unshaken. She took a slow sip of coffee as though his mockery was too small to touch her. The manager stood frozen for a moment, confused. He had expected anger, embarrassment, maybe even a demand for a refund. Instead, her answer unsettled him, as if she carried knowledge he didn't. He cleared his throat and walked away, muttering something under his breath. But her steady eyes followed him until he disappeared. 10 o'clock came faster than expected. In a private boardroom on the top floor of the hotel, the directors gathered, dressed in their immaculate suits, files and tablets laid out on the long oak table. The atmosphere was tense because today's meeting wasn't an ordinary one. Rumors had spread that a major investment or ownership deal was about to take place. The manager, full of pride, had been summoned to assist, unaware that his actions last night would soon come back to haunt him. When the elevator doors opened and the black woman stepped out, silence swept the boardroom. The directors rose to their feet instinctively, some of them shaking her hand with respect. The manager's mouth fell open. His mocking smile dissolved instantly as he froze in disbelief. This was not some poor wanderer. This was the very woman they had been waiting for. The investor. The one with the power to purchase controlling shares of the hotel. Her name echoed in the manager's ears as one of the directors introduced her with admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Ms. Evelyn Carter, the future majority shareholder of this hotel." The words struck him like thunder. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This was the same woman he had mocked publicly, the same woman he thought unworthy of even the smallest courtesy. Now she stood taller than everyone in the room, not because of her clothes or her wealth, but because of the quiet dignity she had carried with her all along. Evelyn walked to her seat at the head of the table, her eyes briefly locking with the manager's pale face. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence was louder than all the insults he had thrown at her. The documents were signed, one after another, until the final pen. Stroke made it official. She now owned the largest stake in the hotel. The directors applauded politely, congratulating her while the manager stood frozen, his throat dry, his arrogance shattered. For the first time, he understood the weight of his own cruelty. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes cold but calm. "Last night," she began, her voice steady, "a man mocked me in front of strangers. He thought he was being clever. He thought power came from belittling others. Today, I want to remind everyone here that true power comes from respect." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting through the silence. The manager's face burned with shame. He lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. The room was quiet, the applause fading into uneasy stillness. Everyone knew exactly who she was referring to. She didn't have to humiliate him further. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand revenge. She simply let her presence speak for itself. And that was enough to make the manager's arrogance crumble completely. Evelyn Carter had arrived as the guest, mocked for booking the worst room, but she was leaving the boardroom as the woman who now held the keys to the entire hotel. And yet beneath her calm triumph, there was still that shadow of sadness in her heart, because this victory wasn't just for herself, it was for the younger version of her, the girl who had once been thrown out and told she didn't belong. This moment was for her. The boardroom emptied slowly, directors leaving with polite smiles and congratulations, their voices low, almost reverent toward Evelyn Carter. The manager remained rooted in his chair, his palms sweaty, his pride crushed beneath the weight of her quiet power. Evelyn gathered her papers calmly, slid them back into her leather notebook, and rose with the grace of someone who had nothing left to prove. But as she walked toward the exit, her steps slowed. She turned her head slightly, her eyes finding the manager's pale, trembling face. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to still. "When people show you who they are," she said softly, her voice low but carrying enough strength for him alone to hear, "believe them. Yesterday you showed me who you are. Don't forget this moment, because neither will I." She didn't wait for his reply. She didn't need one. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she exited, leaving the manager drowning in his own shame. Back in her worst room, Evelyn sat by the window again, staring at the city skyline. The victory should have felt sweet. She had claimed ownership, silenced the arrogant, and proven herself beyond doubt. Yet her eyes carried a heaviness, as though a storm still brewed in her heart. She touched the notebook resting on her lap, fingers tracing its worn edges. Inside, tucked between contracts and signatures, was a faded photograph. A younger Evelyn, smiling with her mother, both of them standing in front of a hotel much like this one. That hotel was where it had all begun. Years ago, Evelyn's mother had worked as a cleaner, scrubbing floors no one cared to notice. Evelyn had often accompanied her, watching as her mother endured insults, sneers, and the weight of invisibility. One night, when her mother had been too tired to continue, Evelyn had picked up a broom and cleaned alongside her. She still remembered the words of the hotel manager back then. "People like you don't belong in the world of success. You belong under it." Those words had scarred her. But instead of breaking her, they had carved her into something stronger. That memory returned now, flooding her with both sorrow and determination. She whispered softly to the photo, "We belong everywhere, Mama, and I'll never let them forget it." Her chest tightened, emotions welling up, but she refused to let the tears fall. Meanwhile, news of the boardroom decision began spreading through the hotel like wildfire. Staff whispered in hushed voices. Guests leaned closer at breakfast tables, and every corridor buzzed with speculation. The same people who had mocked her the day before now spoke her name with awe, adjusting their tones and smiles whenever she passed. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. She knew how quickly respect could turn fake. How easily fear disguised itself as admiration. The very same voices that had laughed behind her back were now eager to sing her praises. And while she kept her face calm, inside she was wrestling with something deeper. Was it enough to own the hotel? Or was there a bigger lesson to deliver? That night, the hotel prepared for a gala dinner in honor of its new partnership. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the tables lined with silver and crystal, and a string quartet filled the air with music. Evelyn entered in an elegant black gown, her presence commanding every gaze in the room. She didn't need diamonds, she didn't need glitter. The quiet power in her eyes was more dazzling than any jewel. The manager stood near the entrance, nervous and awkward, trying to mask his guilt behind a forced smile. Every time he saw her, shame stabbed deeper into his chest. As the evening unfolded, Evelyn raised her glass during a speech, her words deliberate and heavy with meaning. "A hotel," she said, her voice echoing in the hushed ballroom, "is not built on walls or chandeliers. It is built on the way we treat people. Every guest matters. Every staff member matters. True luxury does not come from marble floors or golden ceilings. It comes from dignity, from respect." The audience clapped politely, some touched, others guilty. But every word sank into the air like truth carved in stone. Evelyn lowered her glass, her eyes sweeping the room, pausing for a moment on the trembling manager. He felt as if the entire speech was directed at him, and in truth it was. When the gala ended and the guests drifted away, Evelyn stood alone by the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The night air was cool against her skin, but inside her, the fire still burned. This wasn't just about one manager's arrogance. It was about an entire system, a history of prejudice, and the countless unseen battles fought by people who had been dismissed, mocked, or forgotten. She wasn't just here to own a hotel. She was here to change it, to turn it into a place where no one, ever again, would be told they didn't belong. Behind her, the manager approached slowly, his pride shattered, his voice trembling. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology," he stammered. "I was wrong. Terribly wrong. I didn't see you for who you are. Please, forgive me." Evelyn turned, her face unreadable, her eyes sharp as glass. She let the silence stretch, her gaze pinning him in place. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm but cold. "You didn't need to see me for who I am. You needed to respect me for who I was." Her words landed like a blade, cutting through the night. She walked past him, leaving him rooted to the floor, the weight of his shame pressing down harder than ever. The night after the gala should have been one of triumph, a celebration of victory, but Evelyn could not sleep. She sat by the window of her room once again, the city lights glowing far below like scattered stars. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, calm, composed, successful, yet inside, her heart churned with an ache that no victory could soothe. She had won the battle against arrogance, but memories of the past kept her awake. She remembered her mother's tired face, the calloused hands that had scrubbed away dirt others refused to see, the quiet strength that had held them both together when the world seemed determined to push them down. Evelyn whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "Mama, I did it. They can never laugh at us again." A single tear slid down her cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. The next morning, whispers rippled across the hotel like an unseen tide. Staff carried rumors between departments, and guests discussed them over breakfast. Everyone was still in awe that the woman they had dismissed was now the most powerful person in the building. Some felt guilty. Others were quick to rewrite history, pretending they had always respected her. But Evelyn saw through it all. She moved through the hallways with quiet grace, her eyes observing everything. She noticed how the staff straightened nervously whenever she passed, how the manager avoided her gaze entirely, and how the guests who had mocked her now smiled too brightly, too desperately. Respect, she thought bitterly, was fragile when built on fear. That day, she made an unannounced visit to the hotel's lower floors, places most guests never saw. The laundry rooms, the kitchens, the maintenance corridors where workers toiled unseen. She walked slowly through each space, greeting the staff one by one. At first, they were hesitant, unsure how to respond. But as she spoke with them, listening, truly listening, their fear began to fade. In their eyes, Evelyn saw reflections of herself, the cleaners, the cooks, the bellboys, People who were invisible to the rich, but who carried the weight of the hotel on their shoulders. She remembered her mother among them. She felt the sting of every insult, every dismissal they had endured, and she made a silent vow. This hotel would not break them the way others had broken her family. By evening, Evelyn called for a special staff meeting. The ballroom, usually reserved for glittering parties, now filled with housekeepers, receptionists, waiters, and maintenance workers. Many looked nervous, others curious, but all stood in silence as Evelyn took the stage. Her black suit was simple, yet the authority she carried made the room hold its breath. "I know what it feels like to be ignored," she began, her voice steady, echoing through the hall. "I know what it feels like to be treated as less, to be told you don't belong. Some of you may not know this, but my mother was a cleaner. She worked in hotels just like this one, and I grew up hearing the same words some of you have heard. You're not good enough. But tonight, I want you to hear something different. You matter. Your work matters. This hotel stands because of you." The silence broke into soft murmurs, then scattered applause, then thunderous clapping that filled the hall. Some workers had tears in their eyes. For years, no one had spoken to them this way. No one had acknowledged their worth. Evelyn's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, she imagined her mother standing among them, smiling proudly. Her heart swelled with both pride and grief. But not everyone was pleased. The manager stood near the back, his jaw clenched, his pride still bleeding. He had spent years building his authority on fear, on intimidation, on the unspoken rule that workers were replaceable. Now Evelyn was dismantling that power with a few words. And though shame had struck him, something darker began to stir, a bitter resentment that whispered in his ear. His eyes followed her with a mix of guilt and anger, and a dangerous thought formed. If she stays, I lose everything. Evelyn, unaware of the storm brewing in his mind, continued her speech, her words pouring strength into the hearts of those who had been silenced too long. But somewhere in the shadows of the ballroom, the manager's resolve hardened. This wasn't over. He had been humiliated once, and his pride could not forgive it. Not yet, not ever. And as the applause thundered around her, Evelyn Carter, the woman who had turned mockery into power, did not realize that her greatest challenge was still ahead. The ballroom was still buzzing with energy long after Evelyn's speech. Workers left with lighter steps, their shoulders lifted as though someone had finally seen them after years of invisibility. Evelyn stayed behind for a while, speaking personally with some of them, shaking their hands, listening to their stories. Each face she saw reminded her of her mother. Each voice carried an echo of the struggles she had once known too well. But while the staff walked out with hope burning in their hearts, one pair of eyes followed her with something darker. The manager stood in the shadows, silent, his mind a storm of rage and shame. He had spent years ruling with arrogance, making himself feel superior by breaking others down. And now, in a single night, Evelyn had ripped that illusion away. He had lost not just his pride, but his grip on everyone's fear. To him, that was unforgivable. Late that night, the hotel halls were quiet. The grand chandeliers dimmed, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city outside. Evelyn sat in her room once again, her notebook open before her, her pen moving swiftly as she sketched out plans for the future. She wanted more than ownership. She wanted transformation. She wanted this hotel to become a place where no one would ever feel the humiliation she had endured. But as she wrote, she felt it, the weight of someone watching. She lifted her eyes to the door, her instincts sharp. Silence. Then, the faintest shadow under the crack of the door. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't announce themselves. A chill swept through her. She closed the notebook slowly and stood, her heart steady but alert. She walked toward the door and opened it in one swift motion. No one. The hallway was empty. Only silence. But Evelyn knew better. She had spent too long in the world of business to mistake unease for paranoia. Someone was waiting for her to slip. Someone who wasn't ready to let her win. She shut the door and locked it carefully, her mind replaying the manager's burning stare. She had seen men like him before, men whose egos, once broken, turned poisonous. She knew he wasn't finished. And deep inside, she braced herself. The next morning confirmed her fears. Rumors began swirling, quiet whispers about Evelyn's past. twisted lies designed to tarnish her reputation. Some staff members spoke of overhearing things they couldn't confirm. A few guests even questioned whether she truly had the wealth to run the hotel. Evelyn recognized the fingerprints instantly. The manager was trying to undermine her, trying to poison others against her. But what he didn't know was that Evelyn's story was far deeper than any rumor could reach. She carried truths that were sharper than his lies, and secrets that could end him if he pushed too far. That afternoon, she requested a private meeting with him. The air in his office was tense, the silence heavy. He sat stiffly at his desk, his false confidence crumbling under her gaze. "I know what you're doing," Evelyn said quietly, but every word hit like iron. "The rumors, the whispers, the shadows. You think you can undo me with the same arrogance you've always used? But let me remind you, your power was built on fear. Mine is built on truth, and truth doesn't break." For a moment, he couldn't speak. His lips trembled as if he wanted to defend himself, but the weight of her eyes pinned him in place. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that sliced like glass. "If you continue this war, I promise you, it won't be me who falls. It will be you." When she left his office, he collapsed back into his chair, his breath ragged, his hands trembling. He hated her for it, for the calm way she exposed his weakness, for the quiet strength that he could not touch. Hatred burned inside him like poison, and he swore silently that if she thought she had broken him, she was wrong. This was only the beginning. That night, Evelyn walked through the hotel's corridors again, her heels echoing against the marble floor. She knew danger was circling closer, but she wasn't afraid. She had faced worse storms before, and as she reached the grand lobby, her eyes caught something unexpected. An old man sitting quietly in the corner, his clothes worn, his face weathered by time. No one paid attention to him, as though he didn't exist. But when Evelyn's eyes met his, something stirred. He nodded slightly, almost knowingly, as if he had been waiting for her. Evelyn's steps slowed, her heart tightening. She didn't know yet, but that stranger carried with him a piece of her past, one that would soon pull her deeper into a battle she never saw coming. The old man's presence in the corner of the grand lobby seemed almost ghost-like. His figure was small, hunched. His suit faded from years of wear, and yet his eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, watched Evelyn with an unsettling familiarity. She felt her steps slow, her instincts whispering that this encounter was no accident. The guests bustled around, staff hurried past, but it was as though the world dimmed, leaving only the two of them in a silent thread of recognition. Evelyn approached him cautiously, her heels echoing softly against the marble floor. "Do I know you?" she asked gently, her tone calm but edged with curiosity. The old man gave a faint smile, one that seemed burdened with secrets. "You don't know me," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "But I know you. Ms. Carter, I knew your mother." The words struck her like a bell. Evelyn froze, her chest tightening as though the air had been pulled from the room. "My mother?" she whispered, her eyes narrowing. The old man nodded slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the cane beside him. "Yes, years ago. She worked here, didn't she? Before this hotel changed owners. I was here then. I remember her strength, her kindness, and the cruelty she endured." Evelyn felt her heart pound. The memories she had buried, her mother scrubbing floors, her quiet sighs after long nights, the sharp insults from managers, rose to the surface, raw and painful. "You were here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man's eyes grew misty, but he didn't look away. "I saw how they treated her. I saw how they dismissed you when you were just a girl standing by her side. They said you didn't belong. I wanted to help, but I was afraid then, afraid of losing my job, and I have carried that guilt for decades." Evelyn sat down across from him slowly, her chest heavy with unspoken grief. The old man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I stayed on when the ownership changed. I watched this place rot with arrogance. And I've watched managers like the one you faced, men who think cruelty is strength. But you are not like them. You've brought something back this hotel has never known. Dignity." His words carried weight, each syllable pressing against her heart. For a moment, Evelyn felt the sting of tears again, but she held them back. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. The old man's hand trembled as he reached into his coat pocket. From within, he pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with age, its paper fragile. "Because your mother left this," he said quietly, placing it in her hand. "She gave it to me before she passed. She told me, if ever my daughter returns here, give her this. She will know what to do." Evelyn's hand shook as she unfolded the letter. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and tender, stared back at her. The words were simple, but each carried the weight of years lost. "My Evelyn, the world will try to tell you that you do not belong. But remember, my child, belonging is not given. It is taken. You are stronger than they will ever know. Never bow your head to arrogance. Lift it, and the world will see you." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision, and she pressed the letter to her chest, her body trembling. The old man watched her with quiet sorrow. "I should have given it to you long ago," he whispered, "but I was weak. Forgive me." Evelyn shook her head slowly, her voice breaking as she replied, "There's nothing to forgive. You've carried this burden for years, and tonight, you've given me back a piece of my mother I thought I had lost forever." But as the warmth of the letter filled her, a shadow crept into her thoughts. If her mother had foreseen this, if she had known Evelyn would return here one day, then perhaps this moment was more than fate. It was destiny. And destiny was rarely gentle. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, the manager stood at the top of the stairs, hidden behind the carved railing, watching the entire exchange. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He had hoped to break Evelyn with rumors, but instead, fate seemed to be arming her with even greater strength. The sight of her clutching that letter, of her finding new resolve, filled him with bitter fury. Hatred coiled tighter inside him, whispering darker thoughts. If I cannot shame her, then I must destroy her. And in that moment, as Evelyn held her mother's letter to her heart, she could not sense the danger sharpening its teeth in the shadows. The manager's mind, once full of petty jokes and sneers, now churned with schemes that felt dangerously close to madness. He retreated to his office like a man wounded and plotting revenge, fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the desk as he replayed the boardroom. The gala, the old man's letter, Evelyn's calm dismantling of him, each, memory a nail in the coffin of his pride. And the more he thought, the narrower his options seemed until one ugly possibility surfaced and refused to leave. If he could not humiliate her publicly anymore, he could at least make her fall. If he could not make her ashamed, he could try to make her powerless, ruin her reputation by planting evidence, creating a scandal, a whisper that would grow into a roar and topple even the strongest empires of truth. So he began to whisper to the few loyalists left among the staff, men and women who feared him enough to listen, rousing old resentments and promising revenge for imagined slights, promising raises, shifts in their favor, preying on their vulnerabilities until a small, trembling conspiracy took shape. Someone to drop a forged invoice here, someone to accidentally find evidence of financial mismanagement there, someone to lie about seeing her drunk in the lounge, a rumor about money, laundering whispered into the ear of a greedy journalist friend he had once entertained at expensive nights. Each plan was a little poisonous, seed meant to sprout into scandal. And, while he wove this web, Evelyn moved through the hotel like a calm eye in a storm, unaware of each thread being spun, consumed instead with rebuilding dignity. She began drafting new policies, hiring counselors, setting up a fund for workers' emergencies, and instructing managers to undergo sensitivity training, actions that only sharpened the manager's bitterness because every step she took empowered those he had once controlled. As days passed, small incidents began to appear, anomalies on ledgers, a waiter's accusation misreported by an influencer who loved scandal, a maintenance log mysteriously altered, and at first, Evelyn thought these were minor troubles, bureaucratic hiccups she could smooth with signatures and meetings. But then, a late-night call shattered that complacency. A local news station had picked up a tip alleging irregularities tied to her name, accompanied by a shaky video clip, showing a blurred woman stumbling near the hotel bar. And though the footage was grainy and the clip short, social media's hunger for outrage fed on it until hashtags bloomed and the polite applause she had earned began to fray at the edges. Evelyn felt nausea, not because the accusations were believable. She knew the truth, but because she could see the shape of harm. The way quick minds would assume guilt, the way slow, patient work could be undone by the speed of a lie. And she understood then that her fight was not only to uplift, but also to defend, to root out poison before it killed the garden she had planted. She called an emergency meeting, summoned the board, and asked for every camera feed, every ledger, every witness. Her voice was calm but urgent as she traced the forged invoices back to a shadow account set up with a burner email. As she pointed out, time-stamped CCTV footage that showed the drunk woman entering the elevator alone and steady, then leaving sober and composed. With the precision of someone who had fought legal battles and won, she dismantled each accusation, revealing manipulated timestamps, an edited clip, and a trail of payments rerouted through a shell company registered under a name the manager had once mentioned casually in the bar. And as she presented the proof composed and merciless, the room reeled. Some directors were angry at the manager, others frightened of the scandal, all suddenly aware that the crisis had been manufactured, and the manager's face, which a week ago had been so full of swagger, now paled as the noose of evidence tightened. But desperation makes people dangerous, and rather than surrender, he chose a darker path. If exposure loomed, he decided he would burn what he couldn't save. He planned a disruption for the upcoming charity event, a spectacle that would shift attention away from his guilt and pin doubt on Evelyn by staging a public confrontation that would feed tabloids and force uncomfortable questions. He began to brief the same frightened staff, promising to make Evelyn look unstable in front of donors, to plant an accusation that she had threatened an employee, to leak edited audio that would paint her as volatile. Meanwhile, Evelyn, while preparing legal responses and releasing careful, factual statements to the press, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The old man's letter rested in her drawer, like a talisman, and the memory of her mother's gentle hands had grown into armor. Yet beneath that armor there was a fragile human fear, the knowledge that those who hurt others could reach far, that the machinery of rumor and slander is efficient and merciless. And she found herself more vigilant, watching faces in corridors, double-checking security feeds, and sleeping in short bursts. One deep night, as she reviewed CCTV on her laptop, a pattern emerged. Maintenance workers she'd never noticed moving between floors at odd hours, stopping near the records room, fingers quick as a raccoon, and when she asked around, she discovered with a cold certainty that the man had been recently promoted by the manager after a minor family favor, the kind of small mercy that buys silence. Her chest tightened. She sensed the manager's trap closing in like the jaws of an animal. On the evening of the charity event, the ballroom glittered with lights and donors' names stitched on satin place cards. Evelyn stepped onto the stage to speak about the hotel's renewed mission to uplift staff. Her voice steady, but under the lights she could feel eyes, some curious, some predatory, watching for any slip. Mid-speech, as planned by the manager, a scuffle erupted near the back. An employee shouted something about a theft. Then an edited audio clip, previously unseen by the audience, was suddenly played on a tablet. Someone had put it on social media seconds before. The clip suggested Evelyn had used threatening language toward a junior staff member, and the murmurs rose like a wave. Camera phones flashed, and the manager's small crew began fueling the story, repeating the lines, sharpening the edges of the lie, while Evelyn's mouth tightened and her heartbeat thrummed in her ears because she knew how easily truth bends under noise. But she was no longer the girl who would crumble. She paused, breathed, and instead of losing composure, she asked, calmly, for the original recording to be produced, for the staff present to recount what had happened. And as security retrieved the footage from the event cameras, as hands shook and people testified, the edited clip unspooled into its raw parts. It had been spliced, voice distortions added, timing altered, and crucially, the footage from the microphone on stage showed Evelyn's real words, compassionate and firm, while backstage, CCTV revealed the manager's team whispering and passing the tablet around. The room that had been ready to jeer now watched the slow collapse of a myth they'd believed, and while some faces flushed with shame, others clapped, uncertain, relieved, but the manager's eyes were dark with fury because his public ploy had failed. Defeated but not yet finished, He retreated into a private fury and made the gravest choice of all, to hit where Evelyn's heart lived. He began to dig into her past, hunting for an old scandal, a family detail that could be twisted into humiliation. And when he learned that years ago, Evelyn's mother had died under circumstances that a jealous rival might call unfortunate, he decided to plant evidence suggesting Evelyn had profited from that tragedy. Late that night, he sneaked into an archive room with a collaborator, forged a note implying misappropriation of settlement funds, and slipped it among the hotel's files. The plan was grotesque in its cruelty because it aimed not only to topple Evelyn's business standing, but to wound the tender place she kept for her mother, to make her victory taste of ash. But some plots, no matter how carefully spun, carry their own footprints. A young receptionist who had been coerced into lying and felt a weight of conscience she could no longer bear, tore up the payment schedule and confessed in a trembling voice to a friend who then sought out Evelyn directly, asking to speak privately. When Evelyn learned of the receptionist's confession, she did not yell or punish, she listened. The girl's apology was simple and raw and full of tears, and in that moment Evelyn realized that this fight was not hers alone. It was the staff's fight, the hotel's soul, the legacy of every quiet worker who had been pushed aside, and with renewed resolve she called in lawyers, involved independent auditors, and arranged a live meeting for all staff to show transparency, to air the facts plainly so lies couldn't ferment in dark corners. As the truth began to surface, ledgers corrected, fake documents exposed, coerced witnesses recanting, the manager's world contracted to a pinprick. He had gambled everything on humiliation, and now humiliation was coming for him instead. But he would not fall quietly. In a last reckless act of self-preservation, he sabotaged a critical gas valve in the kitchen late one night, hoping the chaos and the investigation that would follow a small disaster would bury his crimes in confusion and shift blame to operational failures rather than malicious intent. He imagined fire and smoke obscuring his trail, imagined the headlines about hotel accident drowning out the scandal. But he did not foresee two things. First, a night shift cleaner who had once worked with Evelyn's mother noticed the faint smell of gas and acted without thinking, pulling the alarm and opening vents, alerting staff who evacuated guests calmly. And second, Evelyn herself, standing by the security monitors, preparing transparency reports, sensed the alarm and ran toward the commotion, her training and courage turning panic into order, guiding terrified guests to safety, speaking calmly into staff radios while firefighters were already calling back. The kitchen trembled, alarms screamed, but because of one brave cleaner and a leader who refused to abandon her people, disaster was averted, and the manager's act, meant to create cover, was laid bare as attempted sabotage. When the fire brigade and police arrived, the narrative shifted violently. Questions were asked not only about who benefited from the chaos, but about who had access to the maintenance systems. The manager's trembling explanations failed to account for the time-stamped entries showing he had recently signed off on the maintenance logs, and the forged note planted in the archives was found in his drawer, where he'd hidden it during a panicked search. Evidence, clumsy but damning, that linked him to a pattern of lies and sabotage. The board, horrified and betrayed, suspended him pending investigation, and for once, the arrogant man who loved the spotlight found himself alone in a small office, with the lights cold and harsh, realizing that his attempt to tear Evelyn down had only revealed the depth of his own rot. Evelyn, exhausted and hollowed by weeks of attacks, stood in the lobby at dawn as the hotel slowly recovered. The staff who had feared reprisals now walked with straight backs. Donors called to offer support, and the old man who had given her the letter stood nearby, watching with watery pride. But even in victory, her heart was heavy because she knew how close they had come to catastrophe, how easily a culture of cruelty can tip into violence. And as she looked at the manager being escorted away, eyes downcast, she felt neither triumphant glee nor hollow revenge. Instead, she felt the quiet, raw ache of someone who had seen too much pain and wanted, more than anything, to heal it. And beneath that aching desire, a new resolve formed. This hotel would not be merely hers on paper. It would become a place where systems changed, where hiring practices were rewritten, where safety nets existed, and where the smallest voice would no longer be invisible. Yet even as she vowed this, she understood that the real work would be slow and painful, and would require trust where distrust had thrived. And so she prepared for the long game, assembling committees, legal teams, counselors, and an open-door policy that would bind staff into a new family. But stories do not end neatly, and as the manager was taken away, he glared at Evelyn with an expression that promised not only regret but future retaliation, because men like him, stripped of power, often become embittered seeds of danger in other gardens. Evelyn felt that threat like a shadow at the edge of her sight, and though the immediate crisis had been thwarted, she knew the path ahead would be littered with the shards of what had been broken, and she would have to build again from them, brick by careful brick. Weeks passed, and the hotel slowly began to breathe again. The chaos orchestrated by the manager had been contained, the sabotage exposed and the rumors extinguished, but the scars lingered on the staff, on the guests, and in Evelyn's own heart. Every corner she walked through reminded her of what had almost been lost. The dignity of the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the fragile trust she had fought so hard to protect, and the memories of her mother, whose presence still guided every decision she made. Evelyn spent her mornings reviewing policies, her afternoons speaking with staff one-on-one, and her evenings preparing workshops in leadership, sensitivity, and safety. Every interaction she had was intentional, deliberate, a brick in the foundation of a culture she wanted to rebuild. She spoke to the cleaners with the same care she would give a CEO, listened to the maintenance workers' frustrations, and encouraged the junior staff to voice concerns freely. Slowly, the halls began to change, not just physically with repairs and upgrades, but morally. A sense of unity spread, a feeling that this hotel belonged to everyone who worked within it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Evelyn found herself alone in the original worst room, now hers in name but still small, cozy, and a reminder of where the journey had begun. She opened her mother's letter again and held it close. Tears fell freely this time, hot and unrestrained, as she whispered, "We did it. Mama, we made it right." The weight of years of pain, humiliation, and struggle lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of peace she had never known. She realized that victory was not in power alone. It was in justice, compassion, and the dignity she had restored to herself and to those around her. The old man who had guided her through her mother's legacy visited once more. He smiled softly, eyes glistening, as he watched Evelyn move through the lobby, staff nodding to her with respect and affection. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said. Evelyn shook her head gently. "I've done nothing alone. Every hand that's worked with me, every heart that stayed true, they are the ones who made this possible. I only guided it." Word of Evelyn's leadership spread beyond the hotel. The community began to recognize the transformation, not only of the building but of its culture, praising her dedication to fairness, empathy, and integrity. The manager, meanwhile, faced investigation and legal consequences. His arrogance and schemes had left him isolated, powerless, and exposed. A cautionary tale for all who believed that cruelty and deceit could triumph over truth and heart. One quiet night, Evelyn stood by the balcony overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below like distant stars, and she felt the presence of her mother as strongly as if she were beside her. The hotel was no longer just a building of marble, chandeliers, and luxury. It was a home for everyone who worked there, a sanctuary of dignity, respect, and second chances. The triumph was complete, not in riches or power, but in the restoration of what truly mattered: humanity, compassion, and the courage to rise despite adversity. And in that silence, Evelyn whispered a final promise into the night. She would carry her mother's legacy forward, ensuring that no one would ever be mocked, dismissed, or made to feel invisible again. She had paid the cost of hardship, weathered the storm of lies, and faced the darkest human impulses, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, a living testament to the power of resilience and justice. The hotel's lights glimmered, reflecting the calm in her heart, as if the building itself breathed a sigh of relief. Evelyn Carter, once mocked and underestimated, now stood not just as its owner, but as its soul, her mother's spirit alive in every corner, every smile, and every life she touched. The story of the worst room and the suite it led to had ended, but its legacy, the triumph over arrogance, the restoration of dignity, the power of resilience would echo for generations.